Welcome to the Straight from the Source's Mouth podcast. Frank talk about sex and dating.
Hello, everyone. Tamara here. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Jess Lynn, and we'll be talking about non-monogamy and how to open a relationship. If you like this episode, be sure to tell your friends about it and rate it as well. Thanks for joining me, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I think this will be a good episode. We've talked about the lifestyle, but not like how to actually get started as a couple, especially if you were monogamous and now you want to switch. Mm-hmm. So what do you want to say about either why you like talking about this or what you think people should do to start out if they want to do this?
Yeah. I think that, obviously there's many very valid ways to participate in non-monogamy. I think everybody has the kind of their own journey, whether you're like already in a couple or you're single and doing this on your own, or this is like what you've always known. But I think for people who, like myself, so this is also me speaking my life, who are like in a monogamous relationship and maybe like this kind of topic had never come up or like was not even like an option or things like that. I think it can be very intimidating to think about, whether that comes from one person in the couple trying to like come out in a sense to their partner or like share their interest. It's hard. And so I think there's just so much, like deprogramming that you have to do from, what you've been taught literally your entire life about like how relationships should be. I think that's probably the hardest part.
Yeah. And we talk about that a lot in this podcast, that the societal ideas and pressures and all the stuff that goes with it. Like you said, the programming. So like I said, you can either talk about how you did it or how you would advise others to get started.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I did it in the best way, though I did not really have a lot of guidance or like, I did my research. I, read books, listened to podcasts, stuff like that. But I think what's really hard is if you are, say, the person, so me in this situation, like if you're the person who is bringing this to a monogamous partner for the first time, I think it's so easy to lead with fear. And that's exactly what I did. I would say that I did not at any point think like, oh, my husband's just going to be like, no, if that's even what you think, we're done. Like, I didn't think that, but I definitely was like, okay, well, I'm going to bring this up. And either he's going to say, okay, like we can think about this, or he's going to say like, absolutely not. That's not a thing that I want. I didn't necessarily think it would break us up, but I thought there was a possibility it could get shut down entirely. Which would have been really hard for me. So yeah, I was married, we've been married now 5.5 years. So we were married 3.5 years together, 6.5 when I first brought this up. So yeah, I did not do it in a great way. Didn't do it in a dishonest way. Just, I felt like I didn't really, it kind of just like word vomit because I was just so afraid and you're going to be afraid. I think what I would say in terms of like what I recommend people do is like really take the time to figure out like what it is that you want to say, because the reality is it's not going to come out how you want it to come out, because there is going to be fear, and that's okay. But I think the more that you can, whether it's like journaling or just sitting and thinking or whatever, come up with like the things that you're feeling sure about and also things you're not feeling sure about. It's not like you have to approach this conversation and be like, I've thought of every possible situation and this is what I want in all of them. I think just to approach it with like hey, this is something that I'm like feeling or discovering about myself, and I want to share this with you. And it was something that has been surprising to me, so I'm sure it's also going to be surprising to you. And just kind of, it's okay to say to your partner, like, I think I want to explore non-monogamy. and I'm not quite sure what that looks like. Or, this is something I would really like us to learn more about together. And I found these resources, right? It's okay to not have all the answers, but I think the more time you can give yourself before, I think it's helpful to kind of like formulate your thoughts the best that you can, because in the moment it's not going to come out that way. But, if you have them more formulated in your head, I think that can kind of help.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in most areas. Like if you think through what you want to say, and a lot of us just blurt it out and totally get it wrong.
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely.
And so,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, so how did it go? I know you said you wouldn't recommend the way you did it, or you can talk about what you learned and then to do it the way you want to.
Just kind of didn't know how to bring this up. So I just kind of, it was in the middle of the pandemic also. So, right, we're like stuck in our houses and all this stuff. And I just kind of like called him upstairs and was like, hey, so there's this thing that I've been reading about, which is really what started it all. I just kind of was consuming this content on social media and was like, this is interesting. And then it like kind of evolved into like, oh, shoot, is this just interesting, or is this like interesting and maybe me? And I just had never been like presented with non-monogamy as an option. Like no one was like, you can have one partner, multiple partners, or you can just date, or you can be single. It was pretty much just, either you date and then you find the person, you get engaged, married, all that stuff, or you're alone. Like though that's what it seemed like to me. So I think I will say, and I always say on podcasts and anywhere else, that I was very lucky. I am very lucky to be married to the man I'm married to and to have had the reaction I did, because he basically was like, okay, this is kind of coming out of nowhere, but like, can I think about this? I'm like, well, yeah, obviously. Please, like, don't feel compelled to like have any particular reaction right now. But yeah, so he kind of just took some time to like research himself and think about it. And then we spent one very long car ride, like kind of writing out some of our thoughts and fears and what we thought our initial, relationship agreements and boundaries would be like. It went okay because he is a very kind person, and was able to not respond with fear, which I think is a very normal reaction. And I always tell people that, like, just because you get a fear response doesn't mean that like the conversation's over, or, that they don't love you or anything like that. It's just, this is our like normal, natural, like human response when something we perceive as a threat is presented.
Yeah, I can see that. And I know you talked about, or you want to talk about common mistakes people make. So is that a good place for this?
Yeah. I think that, one of the things is not rushing, right? So from that first conversation, right? Like it might feel like it, right? Because usually if you're the person bringing this up, you've been thinking about this for a while, sometimes like years. It wasn't that long for me, but, I think the person bringing this up has had a lot of time to like think about what this would look like, or what, what's important to them. They've also had a lot of time to think about how they think that their partner is going to react, and how, what they're going to say if they say this, that, and the other. And so I think it's so hard not to, but not rushing. I think rushing is one of the big mistakes that people can make, because it's kind of like, once it's out there, it's like, okay, I don't know, like, what do we do now? I don't want to like kind of just let this go, but I also don't want to pressure this person, So I think that one of the big things is like, it really is okay to take literally as much time as you need to walk through the steps of like learning together, figuring this out, all that kind of stuff. So that's one big one. Another thing, and I tell people this all the time, it's opening, for the most part. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, opening a relationship is not going to fix anything. It's not going to fix, an issue that there already is in a relationship. Can it, augment things or give different options and things like that? Yeah, of course. So like, for example, if there's like a libido mismatch in the relationship and someone, feels like they'd be okay with their partner having their sexual needs met outside the relationship, then can that help that? Yes, but that's not really a relationship problem, right? That's just no one's doing anything wrong or making any mistake. It's just that they don't align in that way. But in terms of like, if there's already been infidelity or things like that, do I know people who have had infidelity in their relationship and then opened up and everything has been fine? Yes. And I would not recommend that as like I kind of put it a little bit similar to like sometimes when people are struggling in a relationship, maybe with like their connection or something, and they think, well, we've always wanted to have children, let's have a baby, and that'll like bring us closer together. Are there some parts where it's going to bring you closer together? Sure. When you go to get a sonogram, when you have a baby shower, all these things, but it's also going to amplify all of the things that have been really hard in your relationship. And I think that's what non-monogamy does as well. And so I definitely recommend like being on a solid footing. Really ideally being on a solid footing, a solid foundation, right? That doesn't mean you don't have any problems. It doesn't mean everything's perfect and you never fight or anything like that, for sure. But I think either we need that foundation or we need to like pretty close to that foundation and some type of like professional support around this container to like make sure that we continue to shore up that foundation and not, we don't want non-monogamy to like fill in the cracks in the relationship. It's okay for it to exist on top of it, but we want to keep working on that because in a beautiful and challenging way, I think non-monogamy is really a pressure cooker for growth, right? Like it can bring people closer together. Absolutely. But that takes time and it's very hard for that to happen if there's already pretty big cracks in the foundation.
Yeah, I know I've talked to a couple other people and they mentioned communication and trust. So I'm guessing you would agree with those as well.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think anyone who talks about, it's really relationships in general, right? Communication and trust. But I think in non-monogamy, obviously it's amplified because more than one person means a lot more communication and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think, like for my husband and I, we were just saying the other day, like we trust each other. We trusted each other before we opened up, but I do think we trust each other so much more now, and not like trust each other in this oh, you're not going to cheat on me kind of way. I mean, of course, yes, that, but just trust each other. And like, I trust you to be honest. I trust you to say like what's on your mind or share if you have needs that aren't being met or, those kind of things. So yeah, trust and communication always.
Yeah. And I know we talked about initial agreements with the relationship. Is that a good time to talk about that?
Yeah. So once we've like had this conversation, or if you've already had it and you're like, okay, yeah, like we're both like on board with this. I think then a lot of people kind of get to the point of like, and now what? Right? Like, okay, we've like gotten past this hard, seemingly difficult part, right, of having this conversation. And now we are like, okay, with trying to do this thing, but like, what in the heck does that look like? How do we like respect each other's boundaries? So I always encourage, again, communication and trust. Look at that. I think that one of the biggest, I guess this ties into mistakes too, is like one of the biggest things people do is when they talk about like, these are my personal boundaries. So boundaries like for myself, and then relationship agreements between us. sometimes people will kind of do this thing where they're like, you know what, we really do trust each other. We really think that we have each other's, best interest in mind. And yes, we want to get our needs met. And we also, are looking out for each other. This is important to us to maintain this relationship. And we kind of make some assumptions, which is not usually a good thing to do. So I've had a lot of people say to me, like, if I ask, like, okay, what are some of your relationship agreements? Can you give me an example? Sometimes people will say, well, one of our agreements is to not take advantage of the situation, or to lead with common sense, or to be transparent about our activities, or things like this. And it's coming from such a good place, but in my head, when I hear things like that, I just think, what the heck does that mean? Right. And another big one is like to be respectful of each other. I have no idea what that means. Like, that could mean so many different things to so many different people. And so I think the major thing with relationship agreements is be more specific and be more clear than you think you need to be. It might seem like semantic, or like, we're not kindergartners, we understand, right? But if I think that keeping my partner apprised of activities on a date means that I tell him that I have reached my destination, and then I text him when I'm getting in the car to come home, but he would prefer to know if we change location, right? Like if we decide to go back to that person's apartment or whatever, then I'm not, in his mind, right, keeping him right. So we have to talk about like I think these like glossing over, well, we'll just both like be respectful, like use common sense. We're both very important. So we're going to put our relationship first, if that's a thing that people want, which I think a lot of people start out with this hierarchical mindset, which is fine. But yeah, it just kind of becomes, either we don't realize how much there is that we could differ on, right? Because we have a relationship in which we agree on what it means to be respectful, but now we're opening a whole different relationship dynamic, and we might not see eye to eye on these things. Or it's, again, a fear response of just like, well, if we just say this, like, we don't have to talk about like all these little uncomfortable things. So I think like that's my main suggestion with relationship agreements is like, no, you can, like, it's really okay to ask things that might seem silly. And it's okay to say that too. Like, hey, this might be like really specific, but how would you feel about if I was on a date and this happened, right? It's okay to do that. Because then you'll know. People cannot read minds.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I can imagine where some people want to hear all the details and some people don't. Mm-hmm. Like knowing that ahead of time would be helpful before you spill the beans and they're like, I didn't want to know.
Yeah. Some people do and some people don't, right? Like personally, when my husband is out on a date, I prefer to know if they change location, simply for like also safety reasons, like just to know where he is. I don't need to know like what's going on or anything like that. You said you're going to this restaurant, and if you say, oh, we're actually going to go get a drink elsewhere, fine, cool. I don't care. I just would prefer to like know where you are in case, God forbid, something happened, right? Or you like didn't come home and it's 3 a.m. and I'm like, he doesn't normally do this. Like, is everything okay? Like, is he okay? Is she okay? So yeah, but for him, so he dates a little more casually. I'm in another long-term relationship. We've been together about a year now. So for him, it was like that in the beginning, but now he's like, I don't care. Like, I know you're with him for the weekend, whatever. Right. But he also knows him, trusts him. They've spent time together. Right. It's different. So, that's the other thing I think that's important with the relationship agreements is that they change over time. This is not going to be a static document. It's going to change all the time, and it might even be different with different partners, which is fine. It's okay to feel comfortable with something with one person and not another. I think as long as we're approaching it with like a curiosity and wanting people to get their needs met and not from like a controlling kind of place.
Yeah. And you mentioned you read books and did research. Is there anything in particular that helped you figure out this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the number one book that lots of people will recommend is Polysecure. I'm sure everyone, says that. There are a lot of other great books out there. Opening Up is a good one. There's also it's funny, it's right there. And the podcast Multi-Amory is really great. I believe that team just published a book as well, which I have not read yet, but I believe they just published a book. So that I would imagine is great because their podcast is great. I think that, I started following a lot of like non-monogamous content creators. One of whom is Rachel Wright. She's a psychotherapist and a non-monogamous individual. She's amazing. There's a lot of great people out there. So I started following some people on Instagram. And again, just like looking for people who I felt like I could trust, what they were saying. So, whether they had been experiencing this for a long time, or maybe they've been featured in an article or something, or they have a therapy background, or, not to say at all that those who don't have those things can't be legit sources. They certainly can be. But, I think it's just a general cautionary tale of, the world of technology, right? And just make sure that, the people that you're, seeking this kind of stuff from have some sort of, following reputation or have been there for a little bit, just to make sure that you're, or, just like checking across sources, just like what if you were like literally writing a research paper, right? Maybe you have people that you follow that maybe don't have giant followings or whatever. That doesn't mean it's not legit. But if you hear the same thing across different places, I think that that's a pretty good, indication.
Yeah, it makes sense. And this might be the time where you can talk about yourself, because I know you help people in this realm as well.
I sure do. Yeah. So I am a therapist by background. Non-monogamy is not my therapy niche, but I fairly recently started in the coaching world, specifically around non-monogamy, because I found that there really is a lack of resources for the community. There are so many out there, and there's nowhere near the amount that there are for other kinds of relationships, right? So I am a non-monogamous relationship coach, and I specifically, I help all kinds of people, but I specifically am hoping and looking to continue working with people who are kind of new to this. So my signature coaching program is called Non-Monogamous Newbies, because why not? Some alliteration. And, all types of non-monogamy. I'm polyamorous myself, but I believe that all non-monogamous identities are valid, and we all gotta, band together and support each other in this socially somewhat unacceptable thing that we do. So I run that 12-week program that goes all the way from like, what's your why? What are you hoping to get out of non-monogamy, to relationship agreements, what type of non-monogamy is for you, jealousy, conflict resolution, all that kind of stuff, coming out, all of that jazz. And then for people who, like myself, are maybe in a monogamous relationship and trying to figure out like, how the heck do I have this conversation in a way that's going to come across as genuine and such. I also have a mini program for that, where I work with people like step by step to get through the like, how you're going to talk about this, when, what words we're going to use, how to communicate what you've already thought of in your head, right? Because that's such a big part of this, right? And I feel like you're either in one place or another, right? Like you've looked at it and you're interested, but like your partner has no clue and it's this big question mark, or you've talked about it and they're on board, but then there's a different kind of big question mark of like, how do we start this? So that is what I do. And it's great. I love it. I love supporting people. And, wish I had that. Luckily for me, it turned out okay. But, to have had someone to support me and walk me through that kind of stuff in the beginning, I think would have been super helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any obviously what you provide is awesome. And is there like a parting thing you want to, like a summary that you want to just share to?
Yeah. I think that one of my big kind of messages is, there's so much stigma here, right? And while people like you and I might not get it at all, that doesn't really help people who, right? So I think my biggest message to listeners and anyone who comes across my Facebook group or my page or whatever is, look, there's nothing wrong with being, number one, intellectually curious about something, right? Just because you're not sure if it's something for you or not, there's nothing wrong with following someone on Instagram or joining my Facebook group or looking up some articles, listening to a podcast, reading a book. There's nothing wrong with just letting yourself have that healthy intellectual curiosity. And if it comes then to the point where you're like, this is interesting, but not for me, but this is cool, good for other people, fantastic, then you can move on, right? And if it comes to I don't know, maybe this is for me, or maybe I do kind of align with some part of this, I just don't know where, there is support out there. And so I just always encourage people, go ahead, read the things, listen to the things. It's really okay. There's so many different kinds of people in the world, so many different kinds of relationships and ways to love and ways to, have sexual fulfillment and all of this. Just let yourself be curious and see where it takes you. And then if it takes you to this place, then, look out there for people who, make this part of their life to talk about, to get that support.
Okay. Awesome. And do you want to say how they can reach you? I forgot to ask that part.
Yeah. So I am on Instagram and Facebook, again, Non-Monogamous Newbies. So if you look that up on Facebook, I have a private group. I always tell people it's private because no one will see that you're in it if you're concerned about that. And on Instagram, it's the same, Non-Monogamous_Newbies. And I go live in those groups and I share all kinds of support, and you can DM me and all that stuff. So it's that's probably the best way to get in touch with me right now.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This was another good topic for people. Like I said, I've talked about it, but more when people are already doing it. So this is a good get started, and good to know there are coaches for that kind of thing too, and especially for that initial conversation. So it sounds like that's your one of your main things you do too. All right. Well, thank you very much for being on, and hope you all enjoyed it. And if you did, be sure to tell your friends about it, rate it, and recommend this podcast, especially this episode, to other people. All right. Thanks again, Lynn or Jess. Sorry, I always do that when there's two first names.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Frank Talk, sex and dating educates.